And I suppose that we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, kind of some of the biggest challenges that brands face. That's one is education, obviously, is trying to teach brands new things is always very difficult when they're set in certain ways. And I suppose another one, when you're looking at new events and teams to kind of partner together and collaborate with, is obviously rights issues become an issue when you're at gigs, when you're at sporting events. You know, are there any other big challenges that you see? And I suppose that's number one. And then number two is, what do you think will be the big driver of really pushing live as a concept for brands over the next 12 months?
I think, well, for me, I think it's don't make it live in isolation, you know, create it as part of a marketing plan, and really involve live within a strategy. I think it's almost like having a party and not sending out any invites. You know, you need to drive people to that event. You need to tell them what's going to go on, what's their requirement. You know, do you want them to get engaged? How do you want them to get engaged? Actually sort of directs the audience a bit more, and I think brands can really play a part in that. I think some brands do it better than others, but this is still quite a new space, and I think there's still a lot to learn.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very open space. I mean, even what we mean by live, it's everything from, like taking the NFL, which is a TV broadcast, and putting it online. It's Periscope, which is kind of individual people wherever they are. It's, you know, BuzzFeed exploding a watermelon in your Facebook newsfeed. And all of those things are kind of huge possibilities and opportunities. And even people like BuzzFeed churning out all this content haven't really cracked it yet. And it kind of reminds me of some of the early days of, like, you know, Netflix and streaming. And you kind of had that House of Cards moment when suddenly everyone realized, actually, there's better quality content that I can get through this digital streaming than I could get elsewhere, or it's different, or there's something unique about it. And I think it'll be interesting to see how whether it's traditional kind of events or whether it's completely new types of live event, they adapt to not just be the same thing broadcast with tweets next to them, but really to bring that format to life. And that will attract marketers with it.
I think one of the questions we're probably going to get asked by our clients over the next 6 months or so as live kind of expands and explodes in different channels is what it adds to the media plan, what different facets it allows you to play within. So, you know, depending on where that budget's coming from, if it's not incremental on top of a plan already, is it coming out of TV? Is it being drawn out of digital AV? What does that then mean for how it's measured? What is its effectiveness going to be for a brand? I think they're all things that we're starting to scratch the surface of and starting to make some really good recommendations and kind of hypotheses of what it does. But that's going to be crucially important, and I think that will play into how much it costs to buy that media, how that media is then delivered, the audiences that you can scale, the events and things that you can be around. So it's certainly something that, from my perspective, our clients are going to want a lot more information on, and I think we have to find a way to carve out, exactly as you were saying. It shouldn't be a standalone part of the plan. It shouldn't be kind of exploratory innovation bit. It is core to how people are consuming AV content, but how do you make it part of that overall plan and make sure that it sings, that it isn't just left to use the same content as everybody else's? It's going to be a big question for us, I think.
And actually, I think that's a very good point. You're absolutely right there. And I think the content piece is quite interesting. You know, how do you create the right type of content for this kind of environment? I suppose that's a question I wanted to ask.
And I think what's interesting there is, if you take, say, the TV model, quite a fair amount of TV is live. You think about, you know, X Factor, you think about, you know, live sport and what have you. The brands in the advertising around that content are not, pretty much 99 times out of 100, making live content. They're making content that they think is hopefully compelling for that audience. And I think the opportunity really for brands, the key thing to remember is that you're not, you know, you have to make it live and compelling. And the second part of that is really, really important. And if it's compelling, the actual creative work, the content doesn't necessarily have to be live, albeit it can be, because we have all these tools now that allow people to do live. But I think what we've created is experience for our users, which is compelling. That brings an audience to Alex's point. And the opportunity for brands is to think, what's the right thing for me to do in this space? And as Jerry says, this doesn't necessarily mean a reactive, real-time ad. There are so many kind of compelling ways now that brands can kind of create content for Twitter and obviously elsewhere as well. But I think the opportunity there for all brands to take advantage of that. The key thing is having a very clear strategy as to what they're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think, just on that point, actually, I think also knowing when not to do it is also important. I think a lot of people see the new shiny thing and chase it, and, you know, they think they've got a clear purpose and then try it once, doesn't work because they don't quite know how to measure it, or they don't know what they want from it, and then you'll never see it again. I think it's such a wasted opportunity. I think having a clear purpose, knowing when's the right time to do it, will really give you those insights you want to then make it sort of success in future. So
And I think
Yeah.
the other thing that's going to be really interesting is as viewing generally increases of live, whether it's on Twitter or in other platforms, it's going to be more and more interesting to understand what devices and what spaces and time that content's being viewed on. So how do you behave slightly differently if you've got a group of people who are spending 45 minutes watching a piece of content and, you know, it's a cluster of a family perhaps and they're watching it through an Apple TV or an Amazon Fire versus someone who might be watching snippets of something on mobile as they're travelling, and how do you maybe consider adapting content for those different types of viewing audiences and different types of ways of consuming live?